Fuji is pushing pretty strongly into the budget video camera market. But how does their new X-T200, how does this guy stand up to the current Sony standard bearers? Let's find out. You see that? I didn't have to practice that move. It just worked out. I'm impressed. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So first off, I get it. Saying that the Sony APSC line is the current reigning king of budget video, that's a bold statement to make, but I'm a bold person. You gotta be to make these kind of videos, right? And if you are making online content, there isn't really a better set of options when you consider the value to the dollar when you talk about the A6100, A6400, and A6600. Fight me. Well, we can't fight because we're on the internet. And now that we're starting with this fun yet confrontational tone, I'd like to say thanks to folks over at B&H Photo for loaning me the X-T200 for the last couple of weeks to make this series of videos on. If you'd like to get your very own, there will be links in the description below. This A6600, that is the stand-in for Sony APS-C cameras. This is my own personal device. And it shares the image quality with the A6100 and the A6400, so this is why we're gonna use this. And yes, I do like this series of cameras a lot. So keep that in mind as we go through this video. I'm going to try to be as objective and unbiased as possible, but I'm just a human. I'm just a human, and everything that I do is colored and biased in some way, shape, or form. Can't get over that. Now that we've got that unfortunate piece of humanity, boring stuff out of the way, let's get our way to the cameras. There are three things that I judge all cameras against: video quality, ease of use, and overall ecosystem / upgrade path. First off, let's start with the video quality, because right, cameras, man, this table is gross. Both sets of these cameras have a 24 megapixel APS-C sized CMOS sensor. Both of these cameras can record in up to 4K 30 frames per second, and for slow motion, they can do 1080p in up to 120 frames per second. Unfortunately, if you are looking for higher bitrate recordings, neither of these cameras can do 10-bit or anything like that, whether internal or external. These both just record to their own company's version of 8-bit, which for the price of an A6100 or X-T200, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. There aren't that many cameras out there that are able to touch that. The X-T30 being a very, very rare example. Additionally, neither of the budget cameras in this range have in-body image stabilization. Now, you can get stabilization on the A6600, but it is a much more expensive body, and Sony's IBIS, it's never really wowed me. It's never really wowed me that much. And it's never really given me a reason to spend the money to get it. Like, I did not get the A6600 for the stabilization. The X-T200 though does have electronic image stabilization that's actually really good. I'm a very big proponent of electronic image stabilization, and I definitely think that it's the future of stabilized video, and it's cameras like the X-T200 that really go a long way towards proving my point. It combines with stabilized lenses like the 15-45 kit lens that came with it, and it works really well. Yes, a gimbal would be better. I mean, a fully balanced gimbal, yes, will absolutely be better than electronic image stabilization, but it's good enough that combined with a small tripod, you should have no problems getting really good footage. The Sony cameras, all three of them, unfortunately do not have any kind of electronic image stabilization, which is that's kind of weird, right? Because Sony does have decent electronic stabilization systems that you can find in their RX100 and RX0 line of cameras. Additionally, when it comes to image quality, both of these cameras have their company's version of phase detection autofocus with face and eye tracking in video recording modes. The A6100 and 6400 only have face tracking, but there's not that big of a difference between the two, and we'll talk more about that in ease of use. The real question is though, we've talked about specs a little bit, the real question is, what do the actual images look like? Honestly, I think both look great. Again, we're making some bold statements today. I assume, like, I can kind of hear I can hear some strongly worded comments being typed out right now, because I think the colors on a Fuji camera and the colors on a Sony camera, I think they actually look perfectly good. I think they look pretty darn good, totally usable, and both cameras produce a nice image that will totally work for every single creator out there. And I find it weird anymore, I really find it weird to talk about technical image quality, because almost every single camera released since I started doing this about 3 years ago, all of them look amazing. There has not really been a bad camera out there right now for image quality. The real problem and potential deal breaker in this realm has nothing to do with how the image looks in camera, because again, both look great, but it is as in how long you can record them. The newer version of the A6000 series of cameras has no recording limit. The budget, the mid-range, and the top end, they all have no recording limit. Now they do have like a soft limit, and that the battery will eventually run out in a little over an hour for the cameras using the NPF50W battery, and like the 2-hour time frame for the A6600 using this gigantic behemoth of a battery, the Z-type battery. If you do record in warmer temperatures or in the summer, like in direct sunlight, you could have overheating problems, but these new Sony cameras have really kind of figured out how their overheating works, and I've never ever had a problem with how they thermally manage these cameras. The Fuji, even in perfect conditions, can only record for 15 minutes at a time in 4K. That's the thing that really hampers Fuji budget cameras in my opinion. They have such good image quality. Like this and the X-T30 have some of the best image quality I've ever seen, and they have very, very harsh record limits, which I would not personally be able to live with this camera. While these videos that you're watching, I mean, it ends up being around 15 minutes or less. After it's been edited, the initial raw file is around 25 to 30 minutes. And I don't wanna have to get up, move around, come over here, hit record, come back, and I just ruined my audio doing that. But I don't wanna have to do stuff like that. And it's not like the Fuji app works good enough that I could continue recording from here. Now let's talk about the other half of video quality, audio quality. And here, it's actually about as even as you're ever gonna get. Both cameras have 3.5mm audio in jacks, and the X-T200 comes with a USB dongle that allows you to plug it into the USB-C port here, and you can then use headphones to monitor audio in camera at the same time. That's a huge deal for people that can live behind the camera, and the lower end Sony cameras do not give you similar functionality. You again have to go up to the A6600 to finally get a headphone port. But audio recording wise, I think both sets of cameras are actually really good. And if you know me and know how much I like to talk about Sony preamps, because I talk about them all of the time, that's high praise for Fuji. Now I did have a few comments on my last X-T200 video about being shocked about my opinion on the preamps here, and I think Fuji did a pretty darn good job. I mean, you've heard me record audio in this camera. They've optimized their software or something to make the recording better, because I'm really happy with the audio that I've been able to record in the X-T200. Both cameras also give you the ability to raise or lower the internal gain in their menu system, so you can lower as far as you need to ensure you never peak too hard on your audio. When you just get so excited and you can't hide it, and you just want to share that excitement with everybody. See, did you hear that? That's properly balanced audio. The Sony, if you do want to spend a little extra money, and by a little, I mean a lot, you can actually take the Sony to the next level with their line of XLR adapters. They are powered from the camera, and they record that audio internal to the camera just by plugging the device into the hot shoe mount. It's pricey. Like, I can't tell you that the K3M is pricey, but it is so worth it, in my opinion, if you're gonna make videos like this. But let's combine this. Let's take the video and the audio and smash them together and do a quick vlogging test. See ya out there. Okay, and welcome to the vlogging test between the Fuji X-T200 and a Sony camera. In this case, it is the A6600, but don't necessarily think of this as a strictly for sharpness or field of view. We have very different lenses on both these cameras. Basically, what I want you to see is, how does the autofocus work? How do the colors look? And is there like a big jump when you consider auto exposure between both of the cameras? Because both of the cameras are set to strictly auto mode. They're both in 4K 30 frames per second, but everything else, auto shutter speed, auto ISO, and auto aperture. So if you want to look at stabilization like from a Sony camera perspective, this is the best it's going to get. So if this is not good enough for you, you're kind of out of luck. You're kind of out of luck. Whereas the X-T200 is set to its electronic image stabilization. And can you see that the flipped screen, the side flip screen is way better? It's infinitely better, because I have no idea what's going on. But the reason I let this happen is I do trust the Sony camera to get all of this stuff right. So this is the vlogging test as it's getting ready to, it's like I always pick these vlogging tests like, oh, there's a soft spot in the deck. There's a soft spot in the deck. So I always seem to pick these vlogging tests like right as it's about to rain, because that's when I can fit them in. Oh well, back to the video. And we're back. Man, look, straight up, I love side flip screens. Like every camera needs a side flip screen. Which brings me to my personal favorite part of these videos, ease of use. It's so important. We needed to make this section echo because it's that important. As somebody that's made probably 1,000 YouTube videos at this point. 3 years, 3 videos a week for a while. Now we do 2 videos a week, but about 1,000 videos. Every little bit of friction makes this process suck. And it's not your first video that'll get you because you're expecting things to be bad. It's like the 900th video where you've been doing this for so long that the last little thing about the camera that pushes you over the edge and you snap your SD card in frustration only to give up and play video games instead. Wow, that's oddly specific and never's ever happened to me at all. Back, what were we talking about? Each of these cameras wins something about ease of use and fails in another way. So good news, neither straight up wins. Let's talk the Sony first. So Sony wins and that it has hands down the best autofocus system I've ever seen. It's quick, reliable, and if you get the face box or the eye dot, it's an eye box too, but I didn't want to say box twice. You are just good. There is nothing else to worry about. You are in focus. The problem is, like we mentioned earlier, they only have built-in stabilization on their higher end model. And even if you decide to open up your wallet for it, it's just not that good. I'm somebody that routinely uses a GH5 and the stabilization on my I'm pointing to the GH5, and that is stabilization you can depend on. Sony, not so much. Combine that with their screen only being touch enabled for focus, and it's not actually touch enabled for changing anything or tapping through their menus. It's just something that should be fixed. It's 2020, it's 2020. Sony is a huge company that makes high-end cell phones. Slap one of those cell phone screens in the back here, tweak your menu system around that functionality and call it a day. Then we all kind of do it. Then we could all stop beating you up about it. But the screen does flip up so you can monitor yourself while in front of the camera, which is huge and almost a requirement if you are a solo creator. The camera has to be, in my opinion, the camera has to be at least half of a crew member with focus pulling, correct exposure, and letting the director, you, monitor what's going on. And Sony really does all of those 3 things pretty well. The Fuji X-T200 is a dream when it's recording. We already mentioned it's got the side flip out screen, which makes mounting a microphone on top so much easier. And this flip screen is actually fully touch enabled for both focus, but also for working your way through the menu system. And it's big and it's super bright, and you can easily see this during the brightest time of the day, which is really important because one of the problems with older Sony cameras is you couldn't see the screen during the day. This is absolutely one of my favorite things about this camera, and not just because of its flippable nature, but in all fairness, I do actually very much like that too. It's rare to see such an awesome screen on a budget camera. I was skeptical. I really like it. I do find the autofocus to be perfectly usable here, but for me, it's always hard to trust a system once it's failed me several times in the past. So I haven't personally had a problem with this, but since Fuji has broken my heart in autofocus before, I just don't trust it. I'm sorry, system, you have to then earn my trust back, right? The real problem for me with the X-T200 though is in a couple of things. One, the auto exposure doesn't happen naturally. Much like Fuji's other cameras, you get steps of exposure in chunks, and you can absolutely see it in footage where it's not a seamless transition between the different exposure settings. Two, and the real big one for me, the physical body itself. Fuji normally knocks this out of the park, which might be why I'm so tough on the X-T200. While it does have plenty of dials for exposure controls, they just don't work that well for me. Being digital instead of being analog for changing, and there just aren't even any markings on these 3. I like the mode dial, and I like the number of dials here, and they feel good to turn. I just wish this was more in line with the X-T30, the X-T3, and the X-T4 line of cameras. Those really nailed what a camera body should be. That comment leads us to our last and definitely not least category. What does the overall Fuji X mount and the Sony E mount ecosystems look like, and what kind of upgrade path could you expect in either of these cameras if you were to purchase one? Well, let's be frank. This is gonna come down to where your heart lies. Where does your heart lie? Do you love APS-C, or do you like APS-C but secretly dream of having a full frame camera? Because you can like APS-C but still have some thoughts out there. Because if you only ever plan on sticking with APS-C, if you like the size, you like the size of the lenses, you like the size of the devices, Fuji absolutely has the best lineup for that. They've got the best APS-C glass, they've got the best APS-C bodies, and frankly, they basically own the APS-C space. If you're gonna do one thing, do it well. The Fuji X-T3 is one of the best video cameras ever made. And every lens you buy for your X-T200, you can then use on the X-T3 or the X-T4. And you can set that up. You could buy an X-T3 and set it up comparatively for not that much money. Seriously, it might be like the second best camera deal out there right now. The GH5 is obviously the best. Obviously, do we even have to mention that? Sony does have some nice third-party prime lens options out there from Sigma, and they have a couple of expensive zoom options for their APS-C cameras, but it's not really where Sony's interest lies. You can also use Sony full-frame glass on these smaller cameras, or you could take that APS-C glass that you bought for here and then move it up to a full-frame camera. So the Sony cameras, they do have more flexibility and they do have more like ways that you could upgrade your cameras in the future. I really like that about the E-mount. I do think it's definitely the best mirrorless native mount currently out there. And they've always got those big sensors waiting for you if you really want them. Now, I'm somebody that really only uses crop sensor cameras, so, you know, whatever, but I do like the Sony full frame cameras too. Dang, 2,000 words later, so what, right? Should you go with the X-T200 or should you maybe spend that money on an A6100, A6400, or maybe even an A6600. This is absolutely, like we just said, in the ecosystem and upgrade path. I think this comes down to a couple key points. Do you need longer than 15 minutes recording in 4K? Well, then you can't go with the Fuji unless you get the X-T3 or 4. You basically won't find that capability in the Fuji cameras. There will be record limits if you buy this. But do you want to stick, but that's not necessarily the only deciding factor, right? Do you want to stick with some really nice small APS-C glass that will let you get the most out of the sensor? Then I wouldn't go Sony. Most of the high-end glass is full frame. It's big, it's heavy, it's very, very expensive. Now again, like we said in the beginning, I think either would work for an online video creator. So there are some things that you out there are gonna have to think about. Like, what do you need out of a camera? What do you want out of an ecosystem? And that will make the decision on which one of these systems you should buy into. And if you liked this video, I bet you would like the video where we go a little more in depth about the X-T200 and we talk about it is this a perfect budget video camera? Click here, click on the X-T200 to watch that video. Thanks for watching.